As soon as I finished the bullet points for this video, on the Monday, before the day it was supposed to be up, I realized there was no way it was going to be done on time, which means it's probably time to concede that the goal of weekly videos is not going to happen this year. Probably not any year. But you know what? Here's to trying. Hello everybody, I'm Oliver, this is Chaotic Bibliophile, and today I have 7 books to review for you. All of them positive. Yeah, well, some are complicated, but I would say mostly positive reviews, which I hope you aren't bored by. I swear I am no stranger to negative reviews, and I am not afraid to pan books. I've just been doing well at choosing the books that I read, so let's get into it. We're starting strong with Roleplay by Clara, Drummond, translated from the Brazilian Portuguese by Daniel Hahn. This is a novella that I picked up a long time ago, but decided to read at that time because I was looking for something to follow up 1971 by David Hepworth. As I said, that book just left me... It's not devastated because it's quite an uplifting book, but it was so immersive and fun, and after that I just didn't know what I wanted to read next. So I was just going through my shelves, tidying them, and I found this novella, and I decided to check it out, and I am glad I did. This is a first-person narrative by Vivian, a self-proclaimed misogynist and misandrist whose sole exception is gay men. She is a young woman who comes from a rich family, or more like an aristocratic Brazilian family whose wealth has been in decline for a long time now. She distances herself by being cool and of this class of sort of cultural elite where it's I might not have all the money, or my money might be quite fleeting, or dependent on my occupation, but it's still there. It's about the lifestyle. It's about being perceived and seen as a successful, independent, cool person. She works as a curator at an art gallery, and she applies the same critical eye to her own life and of those around her. And what could be just another tortured rich girl novel that, in spite of masquerading as a critique of the elite, is actually quite aspirational. This actually turns a critical eye to the oligarchy in contemporary Brazil. Vivian is not likable at all, but at least she's honest, and her bitterness serves as a good conduit for the reader to also resent these people. You do pity her to a degree, but then you're like almost disgusted by how vacuous and lifeless these people's lives are, and then you get angrier because look at all their wealth and what they are accumulating, and they're not even happy. So I think it's actually really effective, and it has this writing that, sure, it's a bit clipped, but it's not sparse in this cool girl way. I mean, already it's not written in English, so I think that gives it a little flavor. It feels like a book in translation, complementary. It feels that Daniel Hahn has done a good job balancing the foreignness of the language with it feeling natural in English, which, again, it's a tough act. People might disagree that that is also the way to translate books, but I think here it is very effective. One that I would definitely return to. I think a lot of people might be too upset with Vivian to find this engaging, but I think if you consider it not as her personal tale as much as, the title, role playing, about this as a sort of class book and as a snapshot of this group of people, it becomes much, much more interesting, and I really appreciate it. And as I said, I would definitely return to it. So the next book is one that I know will remain very dear to my heart, if nothing else, for the purchasing conditions, but also because of the story, because I did actually really love this book. That is The Strangeness of Beauty by Lydia Minatoya. I bought this at the Strand in New York City in 2012. That was the first time I went to New York. I purchased it secondhand, and I don't really have any idea why. I had never heard of this book, and now that I've read it, I know that it's actually quite commonly taught at schools, or maybe it was taught in schools back then. But at the time, I had no idea. I guess I just saw it and it was secondhand and it looked good to me, so I picked it up. And so this book made it through so many calls. Since I couldn't remember why I had picked it up in the first place. I always picked it up to give away, but then I read the bag, I read a couple of pages, and I just couldn't, but then I wouldn't read it either. And then I finally picked it up this year because I'm participating in Jen and Carrie's reading spa, link down below to their announcements, and the Storygraph challenge. And my assignment or challenge for March was read a book that reminds you of a holiday. And I was just combing my shelves when this jumped out to me. And I'm so glad I never got rid of it because it's so good. I absolutely adored this book. I feel like it's a bad precedent to set in favor of book hoarding, but hey, yeah. This is the story of Etsuko. She's a Japanese woman who has moved with her husband to Seattle. She's living there now with her late sister's husband, so her own brother-in-law, and their kid, so her niece, Hanae. When Hanae is 11, the father decides she should grow up in Japan. She would be better off in Japan. So Etsuko and Hanae travel back to Japan and they move back in with Etsuko's estranged mother, who is the stern head of an old samurai family household. So lots of things going on there, but essentially it's a multi-generational story of these three women. It seems like it could be quite twee and, we've heard this before, themes of cultural identity and belonging. But I think the way it's explored here is so remarkable and so unique. It's hard to explain without you having read the book because it's quite subtle. It has that Japanese modernist, very, observant tone, but at the same time, it's clearly influenced by American writing, and also the interplay of both is very interesting. So there's this striking image of Etsuko on the ship. Oh, because I should have said this. This is set between the two world wars and finishes with the onset of the Second World War. So obviously there are loads of anti-Japanese sentiment and anti-American sentiments in Japan rising on both sides. And that is really interesting as Etsuko feels quite part of both. She actually really likes Seattle and she really gets used to it. And going back to that image that I was mentioning, when she's traveling by ship and she arrives to Japan, she realizes that her short hair and her dress, which in America made her really chic and modern, here don't seem to help her. This takes the shape of an I novel written by Etsuko, and that is another really strong writing element. The fact that Etsuko as a narrator is very self-conscious of the impossibility or the limitations of inhabiting other person's point of view, and she wants to play with that, and she does, and she wants to interrogate that. So it's actually a really unexpectedly meta text. It's just really beautiful and I am so glad I read it. I just want to read a little bit of the beginning because it's so fun. It has been said that at any given moment, 60% of Japanese are involved in writing a novel, and all of them autobiographical. This phenomenon, though not new in form, the autobiographical novel is an ancient art, is certainly new in frenzy. There's even a word for it, shi shosetsu, the I story. Critics have questioned the motivation behind the amateur I story. Often it seems so futile. Why would so many work so long to create novels meant for their eyes alone? And then ... The theory is that in Japan, the self-consciousness of modernism has collided with the tradition of reticence, of not burdening others with one's subjective experience, to create a people just rolling with confessional angst. It's true, I think. There seems to be few people as concerned with being understood as the Japanese. I don't know if you like that. I also don't know if I did it justice by reading it, but it's that sort of quiet insight that I live for. There are similarly interesting paragraphs on American culture and on the clash of these two ideas of politics and signals and gestures. So good. It's also not a dry book. I feel like the emotions are also really interesting, especially because Hannah doesn't really adapt to Japan that well. In her heart, she is American, and so there's lots of tension there. The last thing that I wanted to say is that this spans many years, and it's not obsessive in its detail. Often we'll get Etsuko saying, it's been a year, I've really neglected my I novel, or I've been focusing too much on this character, I've grown bored of my I novel. It's just so good. Seem like your jam. Please pick it up because it won't disappoint. One more thing I want to say. So in the acknowledgements, it says, I am forever grateful to the late Bernard Vonnegut, a modest fanny man, gentle genius, seer of clouds and dreams. I wondered, is this Vonnegut related to Kurt Vonnegut? And yes, he is. So Bernard Vonnegut was a scientist, a cloud scientist. I'm sure there's a technical term for it. Don't come for me. And he was Minatoya's brother-in-law. So I just thought that was a cool literary connection there. Up next, I have one that it unfortunately isn't translated into English, and that is Correr Solo, or To Run Alone, by Rodrigo Fernández. This, in case you do read in Spanish, I just also want to plug the publisher, which is Overall. I don't know what their distribution is like in other countries, but yeah, if there is a way for you to get this, I would highly encourage you. Not just this in particular, although I did really like this book. Their catalog, give it a look. I'm gonna link them down below because they're really good. Anyways, so this is a novel in the form of a diary that seemed so convincing to me at points that I actually started questioning whether it was nonfiction, but it seems to be fiction, I think, or at most autobiographical fiction, but it's not sold as this is my actual diary of my reflections. So it's about this young man. He is very bookish, he wants to write, but he doesn't want to participate, very Orwellian, like he doesn't want to participate in capitalism, but he is forced to. And so he gets a job at a bookshop at the mall. And this is just his reflections. It's literally just that, his life for a couple of years, actually. I think 2014 up to, I would say, if I remember correctly, 2017 or 2016, something like this. But yeah, it's very quiet. It's very straightforward. I liked that the prose is really reflective. It does feel very, yeah, 2017, sorry. I could have structured that better. Really sad, funny, really anti-capitalist, really honest and reflective, but it's not bitter, and you think a narrator like this would have every incentive to create a really enraged, bitter, sick of everything novel, but instead you start appreciating the little moments and the relationships that emerge. The ending is quite uplifting. I really liked it. I think it's beautiful, and I really just generally enjoy the format of reading journals or fiction that is structured in a very realistic style of journals where, you know, it's not really telling you a story, but just is life, and I really appreciated that. The next book you've already heard me talk about a little bit, and it's The Sound of Utopia, Musicians in the Time of Stalin by Michel Krielaars. This is translated by, oh god, why do I keep doing this? I thought I had written down, but uh I hadn't. This is translated by Jonathan Reeder. So basically, I bought this book early on this year, but then I got an advanced listener copy through Libre.fm, so I listened to that. And that is narrated by Richard Bubbico, or Bubbico. I will say, that he has a lovely, lovely, really gentle, really sweet voice. So much so, and the way he narrated was so textbook narrator that it made me wonder if it was AI, and I had to go look for him, and I realized he was an actual guy, and that is just his voice. I think it's a good choice because I guess this non-fiction book about classical music and classical musicians in the time of Stalin is geared towards older people. That is fully fine. And so they might like this very standard, very sort of sing-songy narrative voice. But I honestly prefer, especially for nonfiction, I prefer a more sort of casual, like you're listening to a TED Talk kind of narration. That was my one problem with the reader. But, he's still really good. And I got used to it after a couple of chapters, so it was okay. I really enjoyed this. So, this, as I said, is about musicians, and in particular classical musicians in the time of Stalin, where they had a really interesting place where they could be really protected if they worked in service of the regime, but then the regime could change their mind at any time. They could suddenly be imprisoned. They could be accused of like modernist sensibilities, not being patriotic enough, just lots of different things. Michel Krielaars has interviewed a lot of people himself, a lot of their descendants. He does a good blend of the past and the present, sort of what the legacy of these musicians is, both in Russia and in the world of classical music. And obviously, it's a very present book considering all the repression that is going on in Russia and the world, but specifically in Russia. So it was really good. He incorporates his passion for music and his own experiences without letting that overpower the book. If anything, it could have been a bit more political. I feel like illuminating the current state a bit more would have pushed this from a really, really good book to an extraordinarily accomplished book. But that wasn't the project of the author, and that is fair. I still 100% recommend it and would give it a read as well, because obviously I haven't read this copy, but it's a really nice copy. It's published. It's published by Pushkin Press. Oh god, I can't speak about this anymore. Good book, read it. I'm just gonna pause and research for a bit. And we're back. Hopefully a bit more eloquent now. And hopefully you will indulge me in talking about another small book by another small Chilean author that is not translated into English, if nothing else, because of its curious publication history. And this is Diarios by Álvaro de Campos, so journals. Álvaro de Campos is actually a pseudonym. It's the same pseudonym as one of Fernando Pessoa's alternative personas. I wouldn't say, were those really pseudonyms? Because maybe they were. Well, what I mean is, people knew it was him. It was more of a different literary masks things. Anyways, no one really knows who this person is. He achieved notoriety by posting his reflections on his Facebook page, which he wrote on his phone while he was manning his dad's, and now his, I think, grocery shop, little grocery shop in Pudahuel, which is like a peripheral borough in Santiago. So really, really interesting. And those reflections attracted a little cult following of writers, including Benjamin Labatut, who actually prologued both this and another book of his. Well, it's actually the same introduction, so maybe they just shared it. But he did write for him, and he praised it enormously. The thing is, Álvaro is a really interesting thinker. He reads a lot, and again, it's this fragmentary diary style prose that is full of little insights and loads of reference to other thinkers, to other writers. It's just so good. One of the themes in this book that I found most interesting was him talking about class and culture in Chile in very specific terms. He talks about linguistic inferiority, which is a big, big thing in Chile, thinking that our dialect is not as good as others. But then he talks about sort of the opposite, that he doesn't want to speak correctly in front of his kid, and he doesn't want his kid to quote unquote speak correctly, and he doesn't want his kid to be a reader either, because why not? I think there's this real tension between the campus's education and literary high-mindedness and his surroundings, which are fully working class, fully pragmatic and material, and he sort of feels certain reticence or self-deprecation in terms of the literature that he consumes. But it's really interesting because I think he's come to a better understanding in his second book, which is Negocio Familiar, which will make an appearance in my top books of the year, which I will release at some point. I just haven't had time to work on it yet, but I will. I will. After the Book to Prize book, that will be my next sort of non-Tuesday reads video. Did I say book? Book to prize video. You know what I mean. In that book, he seems to have come to terms with it a bit more. Right? In this book, he is quite self-deprecating about his own bookishness and how that marks him as different from the people around him who seem to be so technical and so capable to handle the material elements of life. So it's just really interesting, and how that influences like his fatherhood and how he's raising his kid. Yeah, just fascinating. Not as good as his second one, which is definitely a more mature work, but still remarkable and really, really fascinating. All right, the next one is the one I feel most ambivalent about, and it is The Safety of Objects by A.M. Holmes. This is a collection of short stories all about the suburban American dream turned nightmarish. The writing is claustrophobic and really immerses you in this hellscape that Holmes is creating. I honestly felt my stomach churn much more than most horror books that I've ever read. And I say this very complimentary. So if it was just up to there, I would say 5 out of 5, great book, one of the best that I read this year. However, I cannot overlook the fact that there are a few of these stories that are quite ableist and fatphobic in a way where these people are the source of the revulsion. There's one story about this person with cognitive disabilities where the child well, it's not a child narrator because it's a third person, but the third person close perspective is aligning with this kid, and he finds her really revolting and he runs away. And the story is really good, it's expertly constructed, but then how can you avoid understanding that this source of revulsion is this kid, and the way that it's written never, like, it puts you in the shoes of the kid. It never sort of zooms out to be like that is wrong or that is just like a kid's point of view, but when the mom comes, then that's good. You see what I mean? The leftover feeling is revulsion and discomfort at this human. And likewise, there is another story where there is this fat teenager and she masturbates, and the whole thing is meant to make her quite like gross and sweaty and big, and something that could have been about female liberation, it results and sort of constraints about your body, reads actually as like an indictment on this poor teen that's too fat and horny because she's fat and no one will touch her or whatever. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard for me because I do appreciate the writing, but I don't know if I would recommend this book. I don't know if I would read more by this author. Generally, the stories all seemed quite bitter. Is this a fruitful literary project anymore? I'm not sure. I'm not convinced. And those are only two of like many stories that I found uncomfortable, but not in a way where that discomfort is fruitful or artistic in any interesting way. That said, there were other stories that I absolutely adored. What do I do with that? 50-50, 3 stars. I don't know. Also, everyone highlights how funny this book is, and I've read funny, even, dark funny, but this at best is sardonic. I don't think the stories are humorous in the same way that George Saunders can be humorous. Or, even someone like Carver, who's very sparse, can have these moments of like deadpan humor. I think this is very bitter and making fun of these people, sometimes to great effect. But yeah, it's just interesting that so many are like, oh, this is so funny and hilarious and stuff. I think it's more like sardonic, if there's any tinge of humor in. So yeah, I don't know what to make of this. Let me know if you've read it or have any thoughts, and yeah. And now, for the last section of this video, allow me to just gush about The Loneliness of Sonia and Sunny by Kiran Desai. This novel tells the stories of two Indian emigres to the US. Sonia, who moved there to pursue a career in creative writing, and Sunny, who is there to pursue journalism. They've moved separately, and for, I would say, maybe half the book, their lives do not really intersect at all. And I think that the book is all the better for it. You'll see what I mean. It starts in the early 80s or early 90s, maybe. Yeah, maybe like late 80s, early 90s. But in any case, it ends in the early 2000s, so it spans a long time. And so the story begins with Sonia being in New York studying and just feeling so miserable and lonely and calling her parents to cry, essentially. And then she meets this older white guy, Ilan, and they begin a very tempestuous and abusive relationship, with him being dominant and controlling and temperamental. And so after spending some time with Sonia, the book shifts to Sunny. He is also, I want to say, New York, but he's living with his white girlfriend, Ula. He's trying to figure out his journalism career while keeping his girlfriend secret from her family, who is now thinking of finding him a wife. In addition to them, the book is also about their families, their parents, their friends, and their lives. So it's obviously a massive novel. It's physically massive, it's monumental, but it also feels monumental in the same way that something like Anna Karenina feels monumental. As in, the book is not perfect and it may have some pacing issues, but the ambition and the writing that allows for digressions and insights just made me go, oh yes, it's like this. You've illuminated an element of the human character and of existence, and this is what literature can do and it can be, and this is why I read. So it was just very exciting. On several occasions I took pictures and I sent it to my loved ones, even though they weren't reading the book. No context, just please read this bit because it's so interesting and it hits. It really hits you. And some of these have to do with themes that, true, are very buzzy, like immigration, mental health, class, and identity, and all of these things that are being discussed now quite often. But the way this novel approaches it is so superlative, I can't even explain. As I said, though, the pacing is a bit off. Did find myself frustrated because I was so into this one story, and then sometimes some chapters just ended really abruptly, and I didn't like that they ended there. But also, then that would move to a different story, so I was just getting to know Sonia, and now suddenly I'm listening to Sunny, and then, oh, by the way, this is all third person, but obviously closely aligned. and then someone else, and it just felt that because there was no pattern, and there's no, obviously there's like an overarching linearity, but there isn't, like sometimes time would move forward, or sometimes, you would, it would fill you in, and it did feel a bit disorderly, and I wasn't that sure, which is fine. But because I was so into what I was reading already, it took me a while to shift gears. But then I would always be brought back, and by this I mean, I after one or two mini chapters, the chapters are quite short. I know it's hard to believe but the chapters are relatively short. Yeah, after a few chapters, I would be back in this narration to be pulled out again. But hey, again, it's part. I think it comes with the hugeness of the book, both in scope and in size, which is fine. I think the biggest barrier of entry to this book, more than the size even, is just that for such a big book, it doesn't really have much of a plot. Not that much of intrigue, really, until the very end. I would say the last fifth, maybe. And for such a character-driven novel, Sonia and Sunny are not very lovable characters. But I think this is the book's brilliance, because I think Kiran Desai has allowed for Sonia and Sunny to express and think to themselves, and sometimes to engage with others in their like most negative affects, in their like malaises of contemporary loneliness and dissatisfaction, where a lot of her family might have not engaged with that, and the same goes for Sunny. um I think it really illustrates this sort of break between the pre-80s generation and now, where it's like, for better and for worse, I am allowed to be an individual and explore my feelings and express them. And I think the book really exemplifies both the good aspects of this attitude and the bad aspects. I was also worried that once Sonia and Sunny met, this would just become a will they won't they romance. And of course there is some of that, because I think you anticipated it from the title. But I like that the book was not hijacked by the romance, that it never becomes a romance, even though love is an element of the novel. I appreciated that, as well as the subtle and quite realistic, actually, magical realism folk elements, in a way that they are there and they make themselves known, and they do add to the plot and the story in general, more than a plot, actually. But what little elements of plot are in this book that are like a concrete story conflict plot, capital P, do have to do with these more folksy magical realist elements, but the way people react to them feels very realistic. It's like, oh, if these things were a thing at that time or nowadays, this is how we would feel about them. And I appreciated that. I thought they were very successful. I think they will be a problem for some people, but I personally, nothing but good things to say about them. And so I would categorize this novel as great literature, capital G, capital L, great book if you want a big chunkster to immerse yourself in, and something that feels a bit easier to read perhaps than other texts, yet has so much meat to it, both intellectually, emotionally. It's a book that is not sentimental, but also doesn't reject sentimentality, which I think is a hard tightrope to walk. So yes, very, very good. And I have nothing else to say except thank you to Danny, who got me the proof copy. That's it. I feel like I've been talking for so, so long. That was my iPad closing. I really like the back cover. Do I have anything else to say? Not really. Have you read any of these books? Sorry. Have you read any of these books? Do you want to read any of these books after hearing me talk about them? And what have you been reading? Anything good in particular? Are you taking part in the reading spa? Any and all comments are welcome down below. And if not, as always, just leave me a little happy face with a little heart. Maybe a book. Whichever emoji you feel like. That's all. See you next time.